Hello everyone, this is Shannon from That's So Po, and today I'm doing week 31 of my 2022 reads. This week I reread a favorite book, listened to a memoir, and got started on some of my new release-a-thon reading with a few 2022 releases. Timestamps and content warnings are in the description box below. So first, let me talk about my reread, which was The Jasmine Throne by Tasha Suri. This is the first book in the Burning Kingdoms series, and I wanted to reread this book because the second book, The Oleander Sword, is coming out this month, and I just wanted to be so ready for it. I'm super excited. And it was just so wonderful to do this reread. I have not been rereading much since I joined BookTube, even though I used to reread a ton, but with BookTube there's always so many new books to read that I just haven't reread much. And rereading The Jasmine Throne reminded me of just how much I love rereading favorite books. It was so good. I do have a standalone review for it, so I will link that below if you want more details. But basically, The Jasmine Throne is this epic Indian-inspired fantasy world that has a ton of really interesting political intrigue. We follow many different points of view who are a lot of different people trying to figure out what the right choice is for what they want to accomplish. There's basically a pretty bad emperor and a lot of different people who want to kind of overthrow his rule or gain independence from the empire, and each of them has very different ideas of the best way to go about it and very torn loyalties. There's a lot of morally gray characters. There's a really cool magic in this world. There's a disease called the rot where like people start becoming plants from the inside. So many cool things in this. Absolutely loved it, loved the characters, loved all of the epic fantasy stuff. So good. I gave this 5 out of 5 stars again, and I could definitely reread it even again. Next, I read Hola Papi by John Paul Brammer. This is a memoir that I listened to on audiobook, and I'm pretty sure that I heard about this from Adri at perpetualpages, who I will link below. John Paul Brammer is somebody who has an advice column called Hola Papi on, I think, Grindr, which is like a gay dating app type of thing, where people write in and he provides humorous responses. And so this is his memoir of growing up in a small town in, I believe, Oklahoma, as one of the only Latino kids there, and also just really not fitting in, and really later on realizing that he was gay and sort of all of the trauma that he went through to get to that point. And this memoir is sort of formatted as readers writing in asking how to deal with certain difficult topics, and then him responding with his experience in his life and then sort of what he's learned from that. I think that I went in, I think maybe because of the cover, expecting this to be something like 80% humor, 20% serious stuff, but it was very much the opposite. This was actually a very heavy memoir. I had to stop listening to it at points because the trauma was just so intense. The author is a very sensitive person, and the way that he was bullied and the sort of toxic relationships that he went through and all these sorts of things were just so traumatic. I think that this is one of those memoirs that is written very close to those experiences, and it almost the author working through that trauma, which was a lot for me and wasn't what I was expecting. I think I just went into this with very different expectations, thinking I was looking at more of a humor thing rather than a trauma memoir. So didn't quite work for me and what my expectations were, but I still think that his perspective is really interesting, and he does have humor in this, which can be quite funny, and just, you know, his experiences are kind of a neat insight into his world. So overall, I gave this 3.5 out of 5 stars. Then all the rest of the books that I read this week were 2022 releases, starting with Nettle Bone by Kingfisher. This is a sort of fantasy style short novel. It's not a novella, but it's a short novel that my husband Sush and I read out loud to each other. We have read a couple Kingfisher things in the past. We really liked some of her short stories in particular. And so we went into this really expecting to like it, and we loved the first half. But the second half actually has a very different tone to it. So this story is kind of like a fantasy story, where more like a fairy tales type of story, where there is a princess who has to complete some impossible tasks in order to get a witch to help her kill a prince. And it's a pretty fun setup in terms of the way that it starts out. You have this princess who is doing these impossible things. She's making a dog out of bones and a cloak out of nettles and these sorts of things. And I loved the way that the atmosphere was in the first half of the book. It was just this sort of dark, kind of heavy but beautiful atmosphere. I really liked that, and I liked the character. I thought she was a really interesting character. But the second half of the book felt like a very different book. It was much more lighthearted. It was a little bit of a kind of group of misfits heist type of story almost, and it just got a little silly for me at times. I also thought just that the characterization of the main character, Mara, in the first half versus the second half was kind of different. And the second half had a romance in it, and I'm not a huge fan of the way that T. Kingfisher does romance. So I loved the first half, but the second half just kind of fell flat for me. So this was also 3.5 out of 5 stars. Then I read Data and Divination by Andi Buchanan, which is book 4 in their Windflower series. I have a series review for the first few books in the series, so I'll link that below. And this is a novella set in contemporary New Zealand, but sort of this witchy version, where witches are real. People just kind of live their lives normally, but they might have some special powers. It's not something that the normal public knows about, but there's lots of communities, these sorts of things. And this story in particular follows a woman who is around 50 years old, and she had escaped from a very toxic, very isolationist witching community that she grew up in when she was a teenager, and just entered the regular world, and she's now a data analyst and kind of living on her own, until one day her nephew, who she's never met before, shows up on her doorstep. He has left the compound as well and just needs some help, and she realizes that she needs to reach out to the witching community in kind of Wellington area and build some new bonds and figure out what to do. And in so doing, she also meets another witch, another woman that she forms a bond with. So this was just so sweet and so cozy. I really love this series. If you just need a short novella that is going to be pure coziness, I think that this series is great, and I really liked this one. Also, I think you can basically read this as a companion novella. I don't think you have to have read the whole series to get to this one. I thought that just very, very gentle romance. There's a gentle mystery as well, where they're trying to figure out some interesting magic that is connected to her nephew that nobody really understands, and it's just got these great fantasy elements. I love this series. I thought this book was great. There were a couple of like little typos and things, since this is self-published or like very, very indie published, but other than that, I thought this was excellent. I gave it 4.5 out of 5 stars. Then I read Dream of the Divided Field by Yanyi. This is a poetry collection by a Chinese-American trans poet that really examines a lot of issues of identity, especially of identity being torn between two things. Also looks a lot at the trans experience, has a bunch of poems actually talking about top surgery, which I thought was really interesting, although content note for some of how graphic some of that gets. But yeah, this was just really interesting in terms of the themes and the ideas that are explored. The poetry itself didn't work as well for me. I think that just the rhythm of these poems, the word choice, that sort of thing, just wasn't quite clicking with my style. But because poetry is just so personal, it could definitely work for a ton of other people. But for me, it just didn't quite have that emotional connection that I'm looking for in poetry, even though I thought that the topics and ideas were really cool. So overall, I gave this 3 out of 5 stars. And then lastly, I read Gibberish by Young Vo. This is a picture book published by Levine Querido, which is a publisher I absolutely love. And it is about a young boy who moves to a new country with his mom. And when he gets there, everybody seems so different. He can't understand what anybody is saying. It all just sounds like gibberish. And he feels just so scared and isolated until he starts to make some friends and they bridge that communication gap. I thought that this was such a successful picture book. It was so good at exploring this idea, and I thought that the illustrations in this, the way that it was narrated through these pictures, was so effective. The way that the author used black and white versus color, used this kind of cartoony type of feel with these incomprehensible letters versus the little boy and everything that he's experiencing. It was so good in the way that he's forming these connections. I thought that it was fantastic. I totally cried at this picture book. I thought it was wonderful, and I gave it 5 out of 5 stars. Okay, so that is everything that I read this week. If you guys have read any of these, if you're interested in them, if you have any thoughts on them, or if you want to tell me what you've been reading this week, I would love to hear from you. Just leave me a comment down below.